In Revelation 7, John shares his vision of heaven with members from every tribe, tongue, people, and language standing in the throne room before the Lamb. Yet today, there are still over 7,000 unreached people groups around the world. For the last 6 years, my family and friends have been on a journey to find, vet, and fund the task remaining. Come journey with us to the ends of the earth as we share the supernatural stories of God at work through the men and women He has called to reach the unreached. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Unreached podcast. Dustin Elliott here again, as promised, with Jason Kuhlman. If you're like me, you probably were just floored listening to him tell the story of going from college campuses in Texas to the mission field and college campuses in China, the hunger, the thirst, how welcome they were to receive the word, how interested they were, the incredible story of the young man and talking about the 5-course meal, and somebody prepared that meal. Well, somebody prepared this too, and it just unlocked him, right? And then rerouted back to the States, the emotional turmoil, spiritual warfare, the whole components, all the things that you and your team went through. But that was a few years ago. And since then, God has blessed you and your wife with 2 more children. We've got to walk through issues in growing families together, as we both experienced some loss in that regard. We've got to walk through your reimmersion into the college campuses here, your team from China getting immersed in a new college campus that y'all launched into with that team. How interesting that has to be for them. And so let's just trace the path of several of these folks since they've been back. I think some have actually gone back to the mission field since. And then a couple people that you've been able to actually stay in touch with in China as well.
Yeah. There's been a lot of life that's happened since, that day. Probably, 2 of the people are back in the 1040 window doing missions full time.
From the team?
From the team.
Okay.
And they went back about a year after, and they've been in Tokyo, Japan, obviously in the heart of the 1040, one of the most unreached countries in the world. A lot of cultural dynamics there as a result, has hindered the gospel there. But they're now married with 2 kids, and the wife, man, she's a hero of the faith for me. She graduated from TCU. She went to another closed country in East Asia. When you talk about the 1040 window, the countries that are left are hard.
No doubt.
There's a reason that they're unreached, right?
No doubt.
And so, but she went and lived in this other closed country right when she graduated from college. And one of the guys that I was recruiting to go with me to China, he started dating her and married her. She worked in this really hard country. Then she moved to Japan, and then she started dating the guy that was on my team. She came to China with me, and then after we came back to the States, she said, man, my heartbeat is just for the 1040. And so her and her husband moved back to Japan and continue to serve college students in Tokyo to this
Wonderful.
day. She's a hero of the faith for me. I call her 1040 Emma because she's decided that she's just going to be there no matter what.
Oh, God bless her.
And she's learned 3 languages, loves people like you wouldn't believe. And her husband is equally as passionate and gifted for the kingdom. And so they're still serving the Lord over there. 2 of the couples that were with us are at Texas State. One of them is the campus director, and he was really the initiator of that team becoming a long-term team at Texas State. When we got to Texas State and the Lord started doing what the Lord was doing, he said, man, I'm seeing these guys and girls come to know the Lord and in good conscience. I can't just step away from that. And so I said, well, man, what do you think we should do about it? And he said, well, I'm gonna move to San Marcos. He said, I'm either going to work for STUMO and work for STUMO, or I'm just going to do it. And so he did. And I hired him as the director of Texas State. 2 of the other couples, or one of the other couples that was on that team, is still there as well. And it's hard because I want to trace down each one and the amazing stories for each of them. But there's so many stories about how the Lord has used them. Crazy connections, crazy relationships that they built on the college campus. There's so many, I literally don't even know them all. Just like when Jesus says, hey, unless a kernel falls to the ground and dies, it'll remain a single seed. These people died, not physically. They died to their ambitions. They died to their reputation. They died to the financial security that they thought that they probably were going to have coming out of schools like University of Texas. And they just continue to bear fruit in their life.
So I love that you got the ministry going at Texas State. Probably a wise call by you to hire the guy and not send him out to start his own thing, right?
Yeah.
You got good people. It's good to hold on to them. It's a lot harder to bring on new people and train them up.
Totally.
A lot more expensive too. That's something we deal with in corporate America all the time, the cost to retain versus the cost to attract. And so I'm really anxious to hear the story of, I know you stayed connected to a few of the folks that you met and got to work with in China that were nationals that are still there. And we'll just say C to not reveal a full name, but tell us about C.
Yeah, so it's probably, he probably became my closest friend while I was in China. Before our team moved, my wife and I got there a couple weeks ahead of them. And so I said, I'm just going to go to the college campus and I'm just going to explore and just, be able to have some working model of like what it is that we're doing so I can help coach them. And I walk onto this college campus and there's this guy and he's standing by himself. And I thought to myself, I think it was the Holy Spirit. He was like, hey, dude, you should go talk to this guy. So I just go up and I say, hey, man, you're a college student here? And he's like, yes, I'm a college student. And he's like, well, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I'm here checking out the college campus. We took some business Chinese on the college campuses, which is, allowed us to have student visas and be able to be on the campus. And he said, well, let me take you around. Let me show you everything. And again, to the hospitable nature of that culture, he did. He took me around. He showed me the gym. He showed me, the cafeteria. He showed me where the classes were going to be, et cetera. Over our 8 months in China, he became an amazing friend. And probably 4 months in, been sharing the gospel with him several times. And he said, yeah, I want to follow Jesus. And he said, well, I don't know what that's going to mean for me. I'm dating a girl that's not religious. And he said, but I do want to follow him. And so he did. And then he went and told his girlfriend, he said, hey, I know that you're not religious, but I've decided to follow Jesus. And she said, well, if he's worth following for you, he's worth me exploring. And then she started following Jesus. And about that time is when we had to leave the country. But C was so faithful, loyal, but we've kept up, through the years. And he now is married to that woman. And they love Jesus together. And they're raising a family in China with the hope of the gospel. And I think for me, that's what it's all about, and I get into this a lot with, we obviously fundraise for our ministry. Obviously, a lot of the probably people listening, if you're in missions, do the same. I always want the stories to be very compelling, that the gospel is going forward. But at the end of the day, the stories that I tell are always the same. It's literally the same story. A guy didn't know Jesus, felt loved, cared for, investigated Jesus, decided to follow Jesus, found hope, peace, joy, contentment, and is still following Jesus. And that's it. And that's all I do. And that's all we do. And we just try and do it in on the college campus with young people, and it's like donors are like, yeah, but like what else? Like how many people come to your weekly meeting? And it's like, dude, all I got is the same story over and over and over again for 17 years. But when you do that for 17 years, those stories, those kids become parents, and their kids now follow Jesus, and it's generational, and so I guess maybe that's some encouragement to any missionary that's out there that feels like it's slow or it should be moving faster, is it's like, hey, no, you keep sailing that ship in the same direction year after year for a lifetime. You keep building relationships, telling people about Jesus. And one day you'll look up and you'll say, man, I cannot believe what the Lord did. But if you look up in 6 months, you're probably thinking to yourself, not much happened. And that's just the reality of the gospel. We're plotters.
How do you put some context or perspective around the concept of you're not going to be the only step on their journey, right? So you got to plant seeds, you got to see some fruit, and then you had to leave, right? And even in the context of our neighbor in, our neighborhood in Texas, or someone we meet at work, and just an interaction where something difficult happens and you get to just talk with them, pray with them, invite them to church, invite them to a Bible study or a life group, or let them see something different. But like, you may not be there for all the steps. You weren't there for the previous steps. You're not going to be there for possibly years.
Totally.
In all of their lives. And then like maybe at some point in the future, there's a reconnecting point, and it's like, listen to what's gone on in my life since then.
Yeah.
Right? How do you process that for us?
Yeah,
being faithful to your step in that journey, right?
Totally. And Apostle Paul, talks about that. There was a lot of dissension early on through, hey, who are you really a disciple of? And Paul planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but only God can make it grow.
Right.
And you don't know where you're at in that journey and what you're coming into. And bringing this back to China, I remember, one of the components of one of our partner missionary groups is that they gather information for like groups that put together data of what's left to be done in the Great Commission. And so they are given names of people groups, and they're like, hey, we don't know where these people are. We don't know if there's any believers. We don't know, anything. And so I was designated the Luohu people of China, and they're, in the Kunming province and in the mountains and kind of hard to get to. And they didn't know if there was any believers there or not. And they just said, hey, go find them. And so we go, and we're up in the mountains off grid. And
you've been part of one of these search teams.
Yeah.
That is awesome, by the way. The Crabtrees talked about it. The Rimstads have talked about it on the podcast. And these groups that go out before, and they kind of survey, and they ask questions, and they get to know, and they lay the land and map it out. You've done that.
Yeah. And it's amazing, but it's a faith journey, because you don't know if you're going to find them or not. You are given a general area, and it's like, hey, just go find them. And so you're praying a lot. You're asking the Lord to guide you. And anyway, we went, and we came across this older man, and we said, yeah, we're looking for Luohu people. And he said, well, there's a man that lives about 5 kilometers that way that he's Luohu, and I can point you and walk with you. I mean, this guy's like probably 85, and he's like, I'll just walk with you. Again, hospitable culture.
Oh.
And so he walks us there, and I meet this guy. He's farming in the middle of the mountains. And, here these Westerners are walking up, probably never, had a Westerner just roll up on your house in the middle of nowhere. And he comes out, and we say, hey, I've been looking for you. And I said, are you Luohu? And he's like, yeah, I'm Luohu. And he said, you've been looking for me. He said, why have you been looking for me? And I said, man, I have a story. I have a story that I think that you will really want to hear. And he said, you'll be my guest tonight. You'll stay with me. And again, this is a rural farmer, not wealthy. He says, hey, you're going to stay with me. And that night, they made a feast. And over that feast, he's like, tell me the story. And so I start talking about Jesus and who he is and how he came for the Luohu people and how he came for this man. And he said, hey, let me stop you for a second. And he goes upstairs and he brings down like a book that's wrapped in like a handkerchief. And he said, "Hey, is this what's in this book?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what's in that book." And he said, 40 years ago, a man stopped by our house and gave us this book to my grandfather. And I've always wondered what was in this
Come
book.
on.
So to that point of what you're asking is, it's like, you don't know what God is doing. You don't know all the different roads that are going to converge into one moment. You don't know if you're going to plant the seed. You don't know if you're going to water it. You don't know if you're going to get to see it grow. But I think to your point is, it's being faithful with the moment and then saying, man, what is God doing here? And do I press in, or do I say, hey, that's just a seed I'm going to plant, and then I'm going to hope that the Lord brings fruition to that? I mean, that's a 40-year experience between those gaps. And honestly, I forgot the story until we just started talking about it, but I think that is how it works every day with your neighbor, with your coworkers, with your kids, with your parents that are whose kids play on your kids' athletic team. It's like, hey, I don't have to be everything for everyone. I'm going to set out to share the gospel, and I am available to be that. I'm available to see someone come to know the Lord. I'm going to be available to help them mature in their faith. But I'm also not expecting that is always going to happen.
Right.
Because if you are, you also just get really discouraged in ministry.
The scoreboard can't be the outcome.
No doubt.
No, just your faithfulness.
That's right.
And goodness gracious, man, tears are in my eyes and I've got goosebumps. It reminds me of another story that was told on the pod where, the missionary group, they go to the people group, they realize that none of them are gifted in translation. They're so worried about who's going to translate into this language, and they get involved and they meet a guy like this guy, and he's like, "Well, you don't need to translate, because 30 years ago this couple from Finland came here and they spent 10 years and they translated the Bible."
Yeah.
So then they looked them up, called them, and they're like, "Hey, we're here with this people group," and they just broke down crying. And they're like, that was a season in our life. We weren't the right people to stay there. We had to go for reasons out. And we've been praying for 3 decades that somebody would show back up to finish that work. And there you are.
Totally.
Like those stories, Jason, bro, that is just so good. I'm glad that one came out. That goes in your book. Don't forget that one when you write your book.
Yeah. There's a story about a man who went to be a missionary, and he gave years of his life to it. And he said, man, the Lord's just not working here. Spiritual oppression, spiritual warfare in his own life, felt isolated. And he's like, man, God's just not doing anything here. Comes back to the States, deconstructs his faith. Basically says, man, I was a byproduct of evangelical America, should have never been a missionary. Someone came to him and said, hey, do you know what happened after you left? And he's like, no. He's like, hey, one of the young kids came to know the Lord. He grew up. He led the whole tribe to Christ. And I think about that all the time, of just how many missionaries, and how many, we don't even have to say missionaries, how many believers are just discouraged. Hey, what I'm doing doesn't matter. I wish I could do more. I wish God would do more. Is God even working? And it's like, man, we are viewing with such limited perspective that you can have no idea what a lifetime of faithfulness can produce. And I think that's just how God works.
Now, we're reading A.W. Tozer, Knowledge of the Holy, in D group right now. So we just got out of Screw Tape Letters, and we're in the 7 Holies, and we're in, and if you've never read that book, that's another one I would put on your list. It was written 75 years ago. It's incredibly applicable still today. But basically, he walks through the attributes of God, but he starts out the book by just making a point and shining light on how we've minimized God in our culture, and just how great and grand and huge and awesome and powerful God is and to live in the fear of the Lord is something that gets a little lost, I think, in just the weekly sermon routines of a lot of churches and the weekly kind of daily routine of American Western life. We need to regain that. You know, I mean, we got a worship pastor sitting next to us that puts his hands up and puts his heart into songs and brings up the body to worship the King and get their hearts ready to receive the word. And man, I'm grateful for Clint and Amber and everyone on our team here. We do a beautiful, beautiful job. Regain that awe.
Yeah.
Right? Recapture that just majesty of the author and creator of the universe, the man who prepared the meal.
Yep.
And is preparing a feast in heaven for all of these folks who are downstream of all of the faithfulness of the various missionaries and folks in the marketplace and everyday Christ followers that are just out there doing life and participating in their role in reaching the unreached.
I think that's it. You know, the awe of the Lord. And, you know, maybe this is my own journey with the Lord, so it might not be for everyone, but I think another piece is the theology of suffering and persecution. And like as a believer, you know, the word says everyone who wishes to live a godly life will be persecuted. And I think in American Christianity, it can become, hey, if you're not liked, you're too extreme. Hey, what does the word say about suffering when you go through hard times, when you go through disappointment? Right. What does the word say about persecution in your own life? And what role does that have on the mission field? And what role does that have in the marketplace? And what role does that have in our view as we engage this world? And largely speaking, I would say the greatest sermons are going to be the sermons that our lives preach when we're going through the worst times.
When you think biblically about the theology of suffering, okay, so the first place I go is James 1.
Yeah.
You know, consider it pure joy when troubles of any kind come your way, for when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow, so let it grow, right? When it's fully developed, right, you're fully mature and complete, needing nothing. To have a concept, to live by a concept of such heavenly focus that I can be joyful in the hardest times because God is refining me and preparing me and maturing me and building my endurance to get me ready for the seasons ahead. To know that that's part of what my story needs to go through and that I love Him for taking me through that is so countercultural. It is so counterintuitive. It is not the American dream.
Totally.
It's not even the version of China of, you know, believing in self. There was a guy in my office last week, engineer at Apple, from India, Hindu, and he thinks we're going to talk about stock options. And first thing I go to is, man, are you Hindu? Are you practicing your faith? Tell me about, you know, what God you're working with and how does it work for you? And tell me about, you know, family. And it was an arranged marriage. And he walked me through that conversation. And then he gets into the gods and he's like, you know, our gods are kind of who you want them to be, right? You know, if you're going through something, you kind of pick a God that suits that narrative for that time in your life. And if you're looking to do something else, you find the God that's kind of dealing with that. And you just form your gods to your need. And I just think, man, that is so little g.
Yeah.
That is so little g gods, man. That is so, there's no awe and power and creator in a God that you can form, in a God that's a vending machine that you can just go put $1 in and hit a button and get out what you kind of need in that moment. And even taking the little g gods out of it and just looking to self. I mean, you put all your faith and trust and hope in yourself or in your spouse or in the development and success of your kids or any other counterfeit god, false idol. Shout out Tim Keller, right? Counterfeit gods. You put it in any of those, we're going to let ourselves down. I let myself down all the time. And I am steadfastly trying to get up and die to self and get in my Bible and do this, you know, rhythm the right way and constantly, daily let myself down, right? If I was relying on myself, this would be a lot different story over the last 10 years of my life, right? And so I just contextually with the listeners processing this, he's just a better captain of your ship than you are.
No doubt.
And if you're allowing him to be, then you're therefore a better guide for those coming into your life as well than if they're relying on you.
Even as you were talking, I was thinking about this story from China. Again, a story that I forgot, but when we moved into our apartment, we moved into a building with probably 10,000 people, and they're old and they're not greatly constructed.
The apartments, not the people.
Yeah, the apartments.
Yeah.
The people are greatly constructed. And but we had our newborn in his room, and it was probably a 850 square foot apartment. And I noticed that there was like black coming off of the air conditioner, like on the wallpaper.
Oh.
And the bed covered the floor where that black led down. And so I pulled the bed back, and there was just mold all through this floor. I mean, just everywhere. And I mean, we'd been letting our newborn sleep in this room. And I called my landlord. And of course, in America, your landlord's job is to help keep you happy. But in China, it's kind of your job as the tenant to make your landlord's life easier. I didn't know that. And so I said, hey, there's mold growing all in the wall and on the floor of this room, and our baby's in there. And she said, no, it's fine. And I'm like, my Western mind is like, no, it's not fine. You need to make this right, but that's just not the worldview. And so I went and I got bleach, and I went to a local AC place, and I remember I ripped off the wallpaper, and there was just mold all over the place. And I'm just scrubbing this concrete wall, and I'm literally saying to myself out loud, my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I'm saying, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. And I remember telling that story to my team, and I'm like, man, I got this baby. I'm trying to be protected. I'm trying to be a good dad here, create a safe spot for him. I'm nervous about this mold, and the Lord kind of does this. And so many of our team members have come back to me and said, hey, that was one of the things from our time in China that I remember the most, was when you said, hey, I'm going to consider it pure joy to face trials of many kinds. And so I think, to your point, these moments are the moments that will define, and people are watching, and they're wanting to know, how are you engaging the world, and do you really believe what the word says? And inside I was fuming, but at least externally, I was trying to hold on to the word.
Yeah, well, emotions are not always straightforward.
Yeah.
They can be very complex. They can be multifaceted. But what we choose to, in fact, one of the things we love to say at the Ridge is respond to God, don't react to the person. What we choose to respond with and show externally, people are watching. We all have influence. We're not influencers in terms of a social media account,
sure,
but we all have influence, and people are watching how we handle situations, especially if you're presenting yourself as a follower of Christ. Man, I so appreciate you staying on and doing 2 episodes with us. I so appreciate the time. I would like to bring this back to STUMO, the organization. How does it operate? You brought up a question you get a lot, which is, what do you do? You just go hang out at the college campus and run into a kid and, hey, you know anything about Jesus? We don't know the framework of how this goes down. So give us the framework and the strategy. How do you engage with your team? How do you disciple your team? Give us a little glimpse into that.
I would say that STUMO is just heavily engaged in the Great Commission through the building of leaders. In the beginning of Genesis, the first command that God gave to mankind was go and be fruitful and multiply. I would make the argument that has always been the command that is consistent with the Great Commission. And so the first command that God gave mankind, being go be fruitful and multiply, what was he saying? Did he just want more people? It's like, no, dude, Adam and Eve, they looked and walked like Jesus, and he wanted more of them. And then sin entered the world, and it distorted it. And so then you have Jesus coming back to restate that message. Hey, go and make disciples of all nations. What he's saying is, I want more followers of me. And heaven in the book of Revelation is going to be the culmination of people that live and came to know the Lord through that. And so to me, that's the most purposeful thing of your entire life, is getting that baseline of like, hey, whether you are a marketplace leader, a ministry worker, a missionary, is seeing people come to know Jesus and help them mature is the most important thing. Now, with STUMO, that's what we do full-time as profession. Largely speaking, I would say majority of our ministry is spent in the early stages of people who don't follow Jesus, or maybe they have some church background, but they are navigating if they want that to be true of their life. And so we enter in, we throw our arm around them, and we just say, hey, if Jesus says that I came to give life and life to the full, are you experiencing that? And what would it look like to follow him and experience that?
So understanding that framework, how do the listeners get involved? How do they engage with STUMO if they feel like they want to support, if they want to partner, if they want to learn more from the ministry? What do they do?
Yeah, so we have a website, stumo.org.
STUMO?
STUMO.org. We have 300 people that work full-time on the college campuses, on about 38 different college campuses across the United States. We probably have another couple hundred on the mission field in the 1040 window. And so if it's stirred your heart and, you'd like to learn more about one of those campuses or about some of those staff, all those staff individually fundraise. And so their salary is paid by individual donors that contribute to their monthly salary and to their ministry expenses that allows them to go out and work with those college students.
Perfect. For the listeners, we usually end in a prayer. We were just talking about some of the worship songs here at the Ridge, and You Won't Waste Suffering just is all on top of mind right now. And so rather than end in prayer for the second episode, we're just going to tee that up and share that song with you. And, my prayer would be that it does stir something in your heart and you find a new way to engage in your role in the Great Commission. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, guys.
Sometimes faith is just an ember. Sometimes hope is just a glimmer. In the darkest night, Lord, shine your light. And when your plans call for surrender, and then my doubt, it spreads like cancer. When I'm afraid, Lord, give me songs of praise. You're not shaken by darkness or the pain that it causes. There is no measure to what you can do. So let my story bring glory to you. You work through everything. You won't waste suffering. When sickness comes and I'm at my weakest, when pain takes hold and won't relinquish, So when questions arise, I'll be dependent. Though sorrows rage, by joy I'm lifted. When the hurt is deep, still I will say, you're not shaken by darkness, no. All the pain that it causes, there is no measure to what you can do. So let my story bring glory to you. You work through everything. You work through everything. You won't waste suffering.
Thank you for listening to Unreached. Our sincere desire is that what you've heard today will cause you to see the mission of God differently and your role in it more clearly. If this adds value for you, and we hope it does, would you please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen? Also share with your family, your friends, your church, your life group, small group, D group, wherever you do life. And if you want to connect with us, find us on Instagram at Unreached Podcast or email us at unreachedpodcast@gmail.com.